curiosity is a double-edged blade. It slices through the veil of the unknown, but it also opens deep wounds that may never heal. What is the price of wanting to understand the infinite? I was pondering this as the monotonous hum of the thrusters echoed through the cramped corridors of the Strix, our research vessel. This wasn't the first time the government of Purple Lagoon had sent us to investigate something that defied the scientific manuals, but this call felt different. The meteor that had fallen on Fornax 3 was beyond any scale we knew. Anomalous energy, oscillating gravitational pulses, patterns that even the most advanced AI couldn't decipher. Even Atlantis, the AI assisting us on critical missions, admitted something rare: data incongruence. Margin of error unpredictable. Looking at the planet below, its desolate surface swept by icy winds, I felt a chill. Perhaps it was the sensation of being surrounded by a void greater than ourselves. Or perhaps it was the memory of Cain's warning before the mission: remember, Layla, if you stare too long into the abyss, it will stare back at you. The crater was exactly where the orbital maps had pointed. An irregular chasm on the surface of Fornax 3, surrounded by fragments of shattered ice that reflected the pale light of its distant sun. At the center was a nightmare of geometry and texture. Something was there, emerging from the frozen layers, almost like an altar. My God! I murmured as the ship landed with difficulty. In the middle of the crater, a cyclopean structure awaited us, a hybrid of technology and fossilized flesh. The alien head was enormous, perhaps the size of a truck, grotesquely detailed. Walls of distorted bone, fragments of wrinkled skin, and a partially open mouth as if frozen mid-eternal scream. And the eyes empty yet filled with something that wasn't life. It was like staring at a fossil of something that should never have existed. Layla, are you seeing this? Darren's voice, one of the technicians, came through the communicator. He was only a few meters away, approaching with forced caution. I saw how he hesitated, unable to look away from that thing. I see it, I replied, a lump in my throat. And I hope we're not witnessing the start of a terrible mistake. Cain was the first to get close enough to examine the artifact with a portable scanner. The energy readings were more intense than any of us expected. They pulsed rhythmically, almost like a heartbeat. This thing isn't just a corpse. It's active. That's when we saw them. The worms. Tiny, translucent, with a phosphorescent glow running along their bodies like miniature electric storms. They crawled all over the surface of the alien head, moving in coordinated patterns as though following an invisible script. Dr. Voss, bioactivity signals have increased, Atlantis interrupted, its cold and precise voice echoing in our helmets. Maximum caution is advised. This organism does not fit any known biological model. I'm not surprised, I muttered. Nothing here seems to fit anything. Darren, always more impulsive than he should be, knelt near the base of the artifact. These worms, they're organized. Look! He pointed, and I moved just close enough to see. He was right. They weren't just crawling. They were forming symbols, patterns that seemed to change every time we tried to decipher them. Are you insane, Cole? Step away from that thing! Cain shouted, but it was too late. One of the worms launched itself at Darren, biting his glove. He let out a muffled scream, standing abruptly as he shook his hand. It's an thing. I'm fine, he insisted, but we all saw the small hole in the fabric of his suit. Hours later, aboard the Strix, while we analyzed the data collected, things started to go wrong. First, the systems became unstable. Atlantis warned of an electrical anomaly seemingly originating from the worm's patterns recorded by the sensors. It was as if they had infected the data itself. But worse was Darren's condition. He was pale, sweating, his eyes glassy. I think I just ed to rest, he mumbled, stumbling toward his quarters. Did you see that? I asked Kane. I did, he replied. And it worries me more than anything we found in that crater. But nothing prepared us for what came next. Darren started screaming. I ran to his quarters and found him convulsing, muttering something in a language I didn't recognize. The patterns the worms had formed were etched into his skin, glowing beneath his epidermis. He grabbed my arm with unnatural strength and whispered, "It's ot death. It's hunger. They have infinite hunger." The last thing I saw before fleeing the room was the glow in his eyes. It wasn't a reflection of the cabin lights. It was something deeper. Older. Atlantis tried to help. Recommendation: immediate evacuation. Energy pattern approaching critical event threshold. You think? I muttered bitterly, trying to process the horror we were facing. The mission was supposed to be simple. Just investigate a fallen object. But now, staring at the wreckage on the surface and hearing the whispers in the radio static, I knew we had touched something we never should have. The head wasn't just a fossil. It was an altar. And the worms were its priests. When Kane suggested destroying the data and leaving immediately, I didn't hesitate to agree. But deep down, I knew something had already followed us. And wherever we went, it would come too. The unknown has ways of infiltrating us. It starts as a whisper, a doubt, a chill in the dark. But when we finally looked closely, we realized the unknown was already inside us. It always was. Darren was dead. Or at least, what remained of him was no longer human. We found his body in the containment room, bent at an impossible angle, his arms and legs twisted like dried branches. His skin was covered in geometric scars, as if something had carved symbols directly into his flesh. The air smelled of burnt metal, and the cabin lights flickered, as if the ship itself were reacting to the horror that had just taken place. What was worse, he was still watching us. Darren's lifeless eyes were open, fixed on a distant point. From time to time, the body would convulse, as if something inside him was still trying to function. "Atlantis, complete autopsy report," I ordered, my voice trembling. "Not necessary, Dr. Voss," replied the AI. The bioenergetic pattern of technician. Cole was subverted. The alien worms introduced an external neurovector into his nervous system. He was reprogrammed. Reprogrammed? Kane clicked his tongue, trying to mask the fear. So, what did he become? A host? A conductor? Atlantis's word hung in the air like a death sentence. It was Kane who insisted we should take Darren's body back to the planet, so it wouldn't contaminate the ship further. Deep down, we all knew the real reason was the terror of being trapped there with him. Kanan. I descended again to the surface of Fornax 3, with the body carefully sealed in a security capsule. The wind hissed around us, dragging the ice as the alien head watched us from its dead altar. The worms still crawled, their patterns more complex than before. There was an intention in that, something terribly intelligent. "Layla, do you think they can see us?" Kane asked as we sealed Darren's capsule near the meteor. "I'm not sure see is the right word." I looked at the worms, which seemed to react to the sound of our presence, their movements adjusting to the rhythm of our steps. "I think they feel." Before we could return to the ship, Atlantis warned us, "New pattern detected. The anomalous energy is increasing. Immediate exit recommended." Then I heard it. A low, deep sound coming from the alien head itself. It wasn't mechanical. It wasn't natural. It was a lament. "Are you hearing that?" I asked, looking at Kane. He nodded, his hand on the communicator as if trying to block the sound. "It's inside my head," he murmured, his voice tense. The lament grew, and from it came whispers. They didn't have a language I could recognize, but somehow, I knew what they were saying. They spoke of hunger, eternity, of a broken cycle. It was as if we were hearing the last prayer of something that had lived longer than any star. Back aboard the Strix, the air was thick. Atlantis had isolated the systems infected by the alien pattern. But the damage was already done. The data we had collected seemed alive. On the main monitor, the energy readings moved like organisms, forming symbols similar to those we had seen on the planet. "Atlantis, why is this happening?" I asked, exhausted. "The worms are not ordinary organisms," replied the AI. "They are a biological interface. Fragments of a greater consciousness. And these patterns are not just energy. They are information. Code." "From who?" Kane asked. "From what you call the head." The silence that followed was almost unbearable. Kane rubbed his face, trying to stay calm. "So you're saying this alien corpse, is alive?" "Not exactly," said Atlantis. "The being is in a state of transition. It is neither life nor death. It is trying to awaken." That word hit me like a knife, awaken. As we tried to figure out what to do, the anomalous energy peaked again. The whole ship began to vibrate, and alarms went off. "Atlantis, status. The energy emitted by the artifact is causing gravitational fluctuations. If this continues, the Strix will be destroyed in less than 5 minutes. Then get us out of here." I screamed, but the AI hesitated. Removing the artifact from the surface is impossible without compromising safety protocols. Also, the impact of the signal on larger scales is unpredictable. "You're saying whatever this is could affect more than just Fornax 3? Kane asked. "I'm saying it already is." In the middle of the chaos, we realized something terrible. The worms hadn't stayed on the planet. They were on the ship, crawling along the walls, their bodies pulsing like little living beacons. Kane grabbed the portable flamethrower and started burning the ones he found, but it was too late. They were already in the system. As we fought to keep the ship operational, the monitors began displaying impossible images: vast cities made of flesh, planets devoured by living darkness, and a sky where constellations blinked like watchful eyes. "Atlantis, what is this?" I asked, trying not to panic. "These images are memories. Fragments of what the artifact carries. You're seeing what it saw. What it destroyed. Enough. Let's blow this thing up," Kane shouted, grabbing the explosives. I knew he was right. We couldn't let that nightmare spread. But deep down, I also knew it didn't matter what we did. Something had already been unleashed. The explosion on the surface destroyed the alien head and the altar, creating an even larger crater in the ice. The Strix managed to escape from Fornax 3 at the last second, but what was left behind never left our minds. Darren was dead. The worms, at least the ones we found, were destroyed. But the patterns, the symbols, those didn't disappear. They were still etched into the Strix's systems, on the monitors, in our dreams. And that's when I realized the explosion didn't kill it. It didn't kill whatever was behind that head. Because it wasn't just one thing. It was an idea. A concept. The ideas, when awakened, cannot be destroyed. There are forces in the universe that cannot be named. Not because we do not want to understand them, but because our minds cannot contain them. When we look into the abyss, we expect to find answers. But the abyss does not respond. It consumes us. 2 weeks had passed since we left Fornax 3, but time no longer made sense. The horror of that place followed us on the Strix like a persistent shadow. Darren was dead. The worms were destroyed. And yet, something was wrong. Something had come with us. At first, it was the nightmares. Each remaining member of the crew, I, Kane, and the two engineers, Greaves and Ortega, began having strangely synchronized dreams. We called them dreams, but in reality, they were visions. Vast deserts of flesh. Monoliths of pulsing bone. Black skies, where stars moved like living beings. In every dream, there was a constant, the whisper. Always the whisper. The opening is near, the voice would say. I woke up every night drenched in sweat, heart racing, feeling. Gee, as if something was watching me. Atlantis, give me a full report, I asked one night, while the others were in the rest module. The state of the crew is deteriorating, the AI responded, its calm analytical voice now almost cruel. You and the others show signs of extreme stress, hallucinations, and possibly a form of psychic contamination. There is no known pattern for this type of phenomenon. So what do you suggest we do? I suggest you prepare for the worst, Dr. Voss. That was what I feared. The Strix was no longer a refuge. It was a trap. The next morning, or what we called morning, Kane began acting strangely. He had always been the pillar of the team, calm and controlled, but now he seemed worn out. He murmured to himself as he adjusted equipment, rubbing his hands compulsively, as if something was trapped under his skin. Are you okay, Kane? I asked, slowly approaching him. He turned to me with wide eyes. They're inside us, Layla? Who's inside us? The worms. They never end. E'd to be in our bodies. He pointed to his head. They're in our thoughts. In our data. That's how they spread. That's how. He stopped and looked at the monitor. The alien patterns that Atlantis was trying to isolate were pulsating, dancing, forming impossible symbols. They were not just a curiosity. They were growing. Layla, do you understand what this means? They're not organisms. They are. He couldn't finish. The situation collapsed that very night. Ortega, one of the engine ears, went mad during an inspection of the power module. He screamed something about the eyes in the walls and began attacking the ship's systems with a wrench. When we reached him, his arms were covered in self-inflicted cuts, and symbols similar to those on Darren's body were etched into his flesh. What are you doing? I screamed, trying to restrain him. It's too late. He screamed back, eyes glazed. You don't understand. They are already awake. We are just here to watch. Just to look. He tried to hold him back, but Ortega threw himself against the main console, ripping cables and destroying part of the control system. He died there, electrocuted, while shouting, "The opening is near. They are here." It was then that Atlantis warned us. Critical activity level detected. The energy from the artifact, combined with the collected data, has reached a singularity point. Something is manifesting. The lights on the ship began to flicker. Gravity fluctuated. I saw Greaves fall to his can. Clutching his head and moaning. I can't get the whispers out of my head, he screamed. The ship's monitors began displaying images that shouldn't have been there, an alien landscape where vortices of living flesh devoured everything around them. Colossal towers made of bone and metal rose into the sky, like exposed nerves of something alive. In every corner, worms crawled, forming pulsating patterns as if they were the breath of a greater entity. And then, finally, we saw it. The thing. In the center of the visions, a colossal form began to rise. A silhouette made of shadows, flesh, and distorted light, with 1,000 eyes glowing in what should have been its face. There was nothing in its form that obeyed the laws of physics or logic. Just looking at it was torture. I felt my mind breaking, piece by piece. "Atlantis, what are we seeing?" I asked, almost in a whisper. "You are seeing the Umberlith. The entity that lies beyond comprehension. What the artifact has called back to Khan. Science. Greaves was the next to die. He tried to rip his own eyes out while muttering something about cycles of infinite hunger. Cain tried to restrain him, but he was attacked, forcing him to use a scalpel to defend himself. When it was over, we were alone, me, Cain, and the whispers. Layla. Cain called to me, his voice trembling. There's no escaping this. We shouldn't be here. We should have never come. I knew he was right. It wasn't just the planet, nor the worms. It was bigger than that. The Umberlith was something ancient, something that should never have been disturbed. We were intruders in a place that was never meant for us. The ship began to disintegrate around us, reality itself bending under the pressure of what we had awakened. Gravity failed completely, and the corridors seemed to stretch and bend like a living organism. The Umberlith was here. Cain grabbed me by the shoulders, looking directly into my eyes. "You need to escape, Layla. Samian. He has to go back and warn Purple Lagoon. Warn humanity. I can't leave you here. You don't have a choice," he screamed, pushing me toward the escape pod. "If this isn't contained, if this escapes, there will be nothing left. Just hunger. Just emptiness." I hesitated, but I knew he was right. With tears in my eyes, I entered the pod and sealed the hatch. The last thing I saw was Cain igniting the flamethrower, ready to fight something he knew he couldn't defeat. The escape pod launched to the void of space. Through the window, I saw the Strix distort and disappear, swallowed by a black light that didn't seem to belong to this universe. I was alone, adrift, with the whispers still echoing in my mind. The opening is near. The hunger is infinite. The cycle begins again. And for the first time, I understood what they meant. The universe is not a place made for us. It never was. We believe ourselves to be explorers, pioneers venturing into the unknown, but we are merely trespassers. What we find out there is not meant to be understood, only feared. And yet we keep searching, because we don't know how to do anything else. I survived. The escape module was designed for emergency missions, capable of keeping me alive for months, perhaps years, until a rescue ship could find me. The capsule drifted in absolute silence. See through the void, a steel bubble carrying the last fragment of the Fornex 3 mission. I don't know how many days passed before food and water became irrelevant. Not because they ran out, but because I no longer felt hunger or thirst. There's something different inside me now, something that has settled like a permanent shadow at the back of my mind. I don't know if it's real or just an echo of what happened. I remember the silence after the Strix vanished, as if the entire universe had held its breath. The black light that swallowed the ship still glows when I close my eyes, pulsing like a heart that refuses to stop beating. And the whispers, they never ceased. The opening is near. The hunger is infinite. The cycle begins again. I hear them even in moments when I think I am alone in my thoughts. They are not just words, they are universal truths, inscribed in my mind like the scars on Darren and Ortega's bodies. No matter how much I try to turn away, the whispers always find a way back. I did what I could to document what happened. I recorded daily logs, trying to hold on to my sanity while detailing everything: the meteor, the worms, the head, the Umberlith. But as the days dragged on, I realized the recordings were changing. Words I never said began to appear in the playbacks. Patterns of sound that formed symbols. Whispers that weren't mine. The capsule is small, but sometimes it feels larger than it should. Sometimes I feel like I'm not alone. A few weeks later, I saw the first rescue ship. A cruiser from Purple Lagoon, shining like a promise of salvation in the void of space. I sent out my distress signal and waited. They didn't respond. Atlantis, is this right? I asked instinctively, before remembering that Atlantis was no longer with me. It was a reflex, like someone calling out to a friend who's long gone. As the ship approached, I realized something was wrong. It was too silent. No engine. Noise, no signs of life. Just a massive metal colossus floating in the void, like an abandoned carcass. I watched it for hours. I didn't know whether to activate the thrusters and try to reach it or to flee as far as possible. There was something about that ship, something that made me feel the same cold I felt when I first saw the head. Something that was watching me. When I finally decided not to make contact, the ship disappeared. It didn't accelerate, didn't enter hyperdrive. It simply vanished, as if it had never been there. More days passed. Or weeks. Or years. Time no longer matters. I ran calculations using the capsule's limited tools and discovered something that took my breath away. I was no longer in the solar system. The capsule should have been launched on an emergency trajectory, but I was heading into deep space, far from any inhabited system. Forces I couldn't understand had pushed me off the map. And yet, it felt inevitable. By the 26th recording of my logs, I noticed something different. When I played back the message to review it, my voice was gone. Instead, I heard a pattern of sounds that shouldn't exist, something resembling heartbeats interspersed with whispers. It was as if the void were alive, and I was listening to its breathing. I tried deleting the file, but it reappeared on its own. Every attempt at logging was overwritten by the same message. Worse still, the symbols from the worms began appearing in the capsule's systems. At first small. Then, covering the entire interface. They didn't need bodies. They were the very concept of hunger. By the 30th log, I stopped fighting it. I spoke directly to them. By the 30th log, I stopped fighting it. I spoke directly to them. You've already won, haven't you? We came to discover what you were, but we weren't capable of understanding. You let us look because you knew we couldn't turn away. You don't want to destroy us. You just want to use us. To make us part of you. The monitors flickered briefly. It was the only response I received. Finally, another ship appeared. This time, it was real. A mining freighter from Purple Lagoon, an old, worn model, but inhabited. I received a transmission. This is the Vigilant Star. We've received your distress signal. You're safe now. They found me. I was saved. But as I prepared for the rescue, I noticed something. I looked at my arms and saw faint translucent glimmers beneath my skin. Like threads. Like worms. I took a deep breath. I remembered the whispers. The words Darren had spoken before he died. The hunger is infinite. The cycle begins again. I knew what it meant. When the crew of the Vigilant Star pulled me from the capsule, they didn't notice anything. I looked normal. They welcomed me, offered food and drink, asked questions. I smiled, responded, expressed gratitude. And deep down, I felt it. I felt the umbrelith, distant but at the same time so close. I felt the whispers now not as something invasive, but as something natural, as if they had always been with me. They didn't need to destroy humanity with brute force. They just needed to plant themselves. to grow. And I was the seed. As the vigilant stars sped toward the nearest inhabited system, I sat in the cabin, watching the stars. They looked different now. No longer lonely lights in the void. They looked like eyes, blinking from time to time, as if waiting for something. "Are you all right, Dr. Voss?" asked one of the crew members, a young man named Rain. With a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile you only see in people who still believe the universe is a safe place. "I'm fine," I lied, returning the smile. But inside I knew it was only temporary. No matter how far they took me, no matter how safe I seemed, the thing was already here. Inside me. There was no escape. That night, while the others rested, I began to hear the whispers again. But now, they didn't come from the back of my mind. They were everywhere on the ship. Faint sounds in the ventilation system. Echoes and frequencies barely perceptible. Raynor, passing by me in the corridor, mumbled something in his sleep, his eyes vacant. It wasn't human speech, but I understood it. The opening is near. I thought about warning the crew, but what could I say? That there was something inside me, something impossible, that was spreading? They wouldn't understand. They would only try to fight. And fighting it was useless. I spent the days watching them. They were still smiling. Still joking with one another, still believing everything was under control. They didn't know the hunger was already inside them too. I wondered, was this what the Umberlith wanted? Not just to consume, but to transform? To make all of us part of something greater, something we could never comprehend? On the final night before we reached the Purple Lagoon orbital station, I looked out the ship's window and saw the void in a way I had never seen it before. It was as if the entire universe were watching me, waiting for something. The stars seemed to pulse in the same rhythm as my heartbeat. The crew was eerily silent that night. I saw them gathered in the command room, standing still. When I approached, I realized their eyes were fixed on the monitors. The symbols were there again. The words left my mouth before I could stop them. The opening is near. They turned to me, but not in fear. They smiled. A hollow, soulless smile. The last message I sent before we reached the station was brief. "Do not board. Do not open the doors. Do not let us in." But I knew it was futile. They wouldn't understand. They would only see a rescue ship returning, bringing survivors, bringing hope. But I knew. The hunger is infinite. The cycle begins again. The Vigilant Star docked at the station, and I was the first to disembark. I felt the curious gazes of people, heard the whispers of radio communications. But there was something else. Something invisible that was already growing there. The Umberlith was in the silence between words. In the shadows between the stars. And now, it was in all of us. I was greeted with hugs, with smiles, with questions. And I answered them, because that's what they expected. Because I knew it no longer mattered. It was already too late. As I looked at the crowds gathering in the station, I thought of Kane's words, of Darren's final whispers, of the constant murmur that never ceased. The opening is near. I wondered one last time. When we finally look into the abyss, will we be able to recognize it?